picture this. You're a kid of any age and a new game comes out. You love that game and play it pretty often. Your hours spent in the game are immense, and overall, you just think to yourself, this game is for me. Over a decade passes or so. You go on YouTube and see that game that you played a long time ago has a new trailer. However, something is different about this. The visuals are shiny and the art has changed somewhat, and the gameplay just seems different. You ask yourself, what the fuck? Wow, you guys really thought I would actually open this up with some pretentious hypothetical drivel? You're pieces of shit for thinking that. Yeah, let's not waste any more time being terribly unfunny. Classic video games are great fun and nostalgic. However, nostalgia aside, there are a lot of things that plague classic games that make them just not really age all that well. Whether it's the camera system, the design, the overall gameplay, or the visuals, old things don't always age well to modern standards. Which is why, in probably the last nearly 2 decades, we've seen games get remade. Now, to begin, we have to differentiate the meaning of remake and remaster, because way too many people confuse the two for each other. Remasters are usually just upscales or overall visual improvements to a game's world. Nothing has really changed gameplay-wise, but visually it looks different. I don't say better because sometimes things can change or look worse, or the art style can just switch for whatever reason, which for those who care more about art over visual fidelity, that's a little disappointing. Remasters usually have effort put into the graphics over the gameplay, which is fine as long as it sells for a fairly decent price, which we'll get into later. Sometimes they're made in completely different engines to support the upgraded technology overall. Remasters are usually not these high effort type projects because they mainly just change the game visually, and they might fix a few audio issues here and there, but it's all mainly presentational things that they change, which isn't bad, but there's less effort in a remaster versus a whole new game. Remakes are very different from remasters in that not only do the presentation aspects get changed, but the whole game itself gets completely revamped, or at least it's supposed to be. There are many things a remake can change to pass off as a new game. Again, not just graphics, but also gameplay, controls, mechanics, perspective, and how even the story's told. Games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ratchet & Clank 2016, and many more can attest to this fact. Notice how I didn't say anything is improved like I said in the last section, because there are mainly changes that they can change for the worst and for the best. Like I said, for the remaster section, things like the art can change, but in remakes, it can be worse since you also have to deal with the fact that gameplay can also be ruined and the story can be completely dumbed down. I'm way more hard on remakes since these are supposed to be the originals but with a new style that seems more contemporary and mainstream. These games are supposed to introduce people to franchises, whether it's the critics who claim that the game hasn't aged well, or the younger crowd that feels like they can't get into these games because of how unfamiliar they are with the elements of the game, which can at times feel very esoteric or incredibly archaic. So now we know what remakes are, and now we'll get into the pricing as to whether a game is worthy of the title remake, which is based on a certain criteria. When you go out and buy something new, you expect the product to be worth it. And in the case of remakes, there are two things I want to mention in this category. First thing when talking about the price and worth of a remake is content. Content in a remake is important because when a game is selling basically a new game, well, you have to justify it with some content. A bad example of this is the fairly recent release of The Last of Us Part 1 remake for PS5 and, as of this recording, a PC release that comes soon, whatever that tells you. Point being is that The Last of Us 1's remake doesn't really have a whole lot of content to be worth $70, and they even remove shit like the multiplayer, which, while not exactly essential to the first game's praise and critical acclaim, I don't exactly think that it was necessary to remove that, and plus it would have been fun to just have it in the game. This is an example of the bad remake, because not only is Last of Us not even 10 years old at this point, but they also stripped away content for something that could have been shipped at $40 to $50 at most. On the point of being barely 10 years old, it shows a bigger issue with the game's existence. Gaming hasn't really changed all that much since 2013 to 2014. The industry is kind of stagnant, and the biggest single player games to play are kind of similar. Last of Us 1 Remake has great visuals and fine gameplay, but it doesn't really do much to justify its price. A good example of a remake that's worth it is Final Fantasy VII Remake. No matter how you actually feel about it, the game has entirely new gameplay and is borderline in a new genre compared to the original game that released 24 years beforehand. Rather than being a turn based RPG, there's the more contemporary and more flashy combat that doesn't require clicking through menus, as much at least. The story, for better or worse, has a few changes in the narrative that can make it pretty much in its own universe, and there are of course updated designs and slight art differences. The second thing in considering a remake's worth is just quality in itself. By this I mean that a remake can be a good game, but also a bad remake and vice versa. Ratchet and Clank 2016 is a fun game to play with a few good jokes, I guess, and some fairly fun gameplay, but compared to the original, it's pretty dull, inoffensive, and narratively devoid of any core personality. And even the cutscenes can at times feel static, bland, and anemic in structure. A good remake is something like Resident Evil 2 Remake. In that game, there's a new perspective that feels welcome, and it still has what made the original game so good and fun, like the horror and mystery of the gameplay. Even adding things like being able to skip transitory cutscenes and such. Remakes can't just be good on modifications to appeal to its contemporary audience, but also have to be really good reimaginings of the original games, because this is advertised as the improvement to the classic but dated game of the past. Remakes are a fickle thing. You have to change a fair amount of things to justify the product as a brand new game, but you also have to make sure that not too much has changed to the point where you think it's not a part of the same franchise, or not even the same game altogether. I was once talking to someone about whether The Last of Us Remake is truly worth $70, and that person said I was, quote, relying exclusively on feeling and not what the devs say. And to that I asked, well, isn't it supposed to feel like a new game? Even because, like, the game is being fucking advertised as one? And I guess they just remain silent. Point being that remakes are not only supposed to take you on the same adventure as you did years ago, but they're also supposed to be new experiences too. I'm never against remakes when they're announced, but I am against them when they change absolutely nothing, or change too much to the point where it lacks franchise cohesion. I usually remain cautiously optimistic for them anyways, because it could be a good or bad remake. Or even if it's a bad remake, it could still be a good game. Overall, I'd say that remakes can work to appeal to a new audience since the gaming world has changed so much in the last 2 decades. I just think that what constitutes a remake can be a few simple changes, but what constitutes a good remake is those changes being done well. To be a remake, well, it definitely should feel like one.